Hello and welcome back to another lecture on phonetics. In the last lectures we discussed the consonants and various ways to distinguish between them. We discussed voicing, we discussed place of articulation. In this lecture we talk about the manner of articulation. Stay tuned. There is one more way that we can distinguish between sounds. Take for example the sound B and the sound M. Now when it comes to voicing, B is a voiced sound. M is also a voiced sound. B is produced through or by both of the lips, and so its place of articulation is at the lips, and so we call it a bilabial. The M sound is also a bilabial. So then these are exactly the same. So we need one more factor to distinguish B from M, for example. What difference do you see between B and M, besides whether there's vibration or not, and besides where the sound is articulated? How about asking how it's articulated, or the manner in which it is articulated? Alright, try to close your nose and pronounce the first one. B. Not as easy as we want it to be, but we can still pronounce it. Try to pronounce the second one, M, while blocking your nose. M. Now you sound very strange. That's because in producing the M, the air goes through the nasal cavity. But in producing the B sound, the air goes through the oral cavity. Since the M is produced by the air going through the nasal cavity, we call it a nasal sound. Therefore, M is a nasal sound. Now ask yourselves a question. Without blocking your nose now, when you pronounce M, can you pronounce it continuously? Of course, we can say, for example, mm. Try doing the same with the B sound. All of a sudden, you feel that the air is completely blocked and then released all of a sudden to create the B sound. B sound. So this is what we call a stop. A stop means that the airflow is completely blocked and then all of a sudden released. Okay? So then the manner in which the B sound is produced is by blocking or stopping the airflow. The manner in which the M is produced, or the M sound is produced, is through letting the air pass through the nasal cavity. So take what we just discussed as an example or an introduction to our third method used to distinguish between sounds, and that is the manner of articulation. So let's check out the manners of articulation. So here are the manners in which sounds may be articulated. In particular, we're looking at the consonants. So sounds can be articulated with a stop or a blocking of the airflow and then a sudden release. Such sounds are like the P, the B, K, the G, the T, the D, and the glottal stop. Sounds could also be produced by constricting the airflow or making it so constricted, meaning that the airflow passes through a very tight passage so that it creates friction. Such sounds are called fricatives. Examples are F, V, S, Z, Th, Th, Sh, and J. Notice one very important difference now between stops and fricatives. Try to say F continuously. Try to say S continuously. S. Try to say now any one of the stops continuously. It doesn't work. So one major difference between a stop and a fricative is that in a fricative the airflow is continuous. So you have a very tight passage where air can go through. And in this tight passage, friction occurs. But nevertheless, the air is not completely blocked. When we look at the stop, on the other hand, the airflow passes through and then is completely blocked. Then all of a sudden the air is completely released and is allowed to continue. The third type is called the affricate. The affricates are only two sounds, ch and the j. Now an affricate, quite simply put, is a mix between a stop and a fricative, meaning that as the sound is produced, at first there is a complete blockage of the air, alright, complete blockage of the air, just like a stop, and then the passageway is opened, but not all the way. The passageway is opened just a little bit to allow air to go through, but since it's such a narrow passage, it will create friction. And so, now it's acting like a fricative. So an affricate starts off as a stop and ends up as a fricative. Even if you notice here in the symbols used, ch, we used a combination of a t, which is a stop, and then a sh, which is a fricative. Likewise here, we started with a d, which is a stop, and then a j, which is a fricative. Now I'm pretty sure you already know what the nasal sounds are, and those are the sounds that are produced by air moving through the nasal cavity. In English we have three sounds, m, n, and the ing sound. So now let's discuss the lateral approximant and the retroflex approximant. Lateral here can be taken to mean the L sound. The retroflex will be the American R sound. Now what do we mean by the word approximant? Let's draw the tongue. Pretend that this is the back and this is the front of the tongue. Usually in the sounds that we discussed before, air passes on top of the tongue out through the end of the mouth. And usually the tongue would be raised up to block the air in several different areas. In an approximant, however, air coming up through or pushing out through our lungs moves up to the oral cavity and then passes through the sides of the tongue, not on top of it. This kind of movement creates an approximant, which can either be lateral, and so we get the L, or retroflex, and so we get the American R. Alright, we're almost done. The last one we're going to talk about is the glides. The glides in English are the W and the inverted W and the Y sound. So what are these glides? How do they differ from everything else? There's another name for a glide, and that is semi-vowel, meaning it's kind of a vowel. It's not a full version of a vowel, but it's very close to being a vowel. So if there were consonants and vowels, a semi-vowel or a glide would be somewhere in between, having characteristics of both consonants and vowels. So what characteristic of vowels do glides have? Well, in the next lecture we're going to talk about how we distinguish vowels. We're going to notice that vowels do not have places of articulation, and that's because the airflow passes freely all the way out without being obstructed in any way. Glides also share this same characteristic. So when a glide passes out through our oral cavity, it is not impeded, it is not blocked in any way. The only thing that might modify the airflow is the lips all the way at the end. So if you round your lips, you end up producing something like the W sound or the W sound. If you stretch out your lips, you end up producing something like the Y sound. But all through the airflow's journey, all the way up to the teeth and past the teeth to the lips, alright, nothing has been blocked or impeded in any way. Well, great, so how is it similar to a consonant? Well, it's similar to a consonant because a consonant can't be, let's call it for now, the center of a syllable. So take, for example, the name Peter. Peter is made up out of two syllables. P-ter, P-ter. Take David, David, David. Now these words are made up out of two syllables, okay? Let's take the second syllable of each. The center of the syllable is a vowel, and the other parts of the syllable are consonants, okay? Only the center is the vowel. Now a glide is similar to a consonant in that it cannot be the center of a syllable. So take the word cow, for example. The center of the syllable is the vowel, but at the ends you have a consonant and a consonant. So this W, or glide, is similar to consonants in that way. Therefore, a glide is called a semi-vowel. It's not completely a vowel, but it's still not completely a consonant. So let's recap. Everything we discussed so far is in this chart. We started off by discussing the first distinguishing factor between consonants, and that is whether it is voiced or voiceless. If you notice the sounds right here, within one box, a sound can either be to the left or to the right. If a sound is to the left, that means it is minus voice, meaning it is voiceless, meaning there is no vibration. If a sound is to the right of the box, that means it is plus voice. If it's the only sound in the box, like these sounds, then it is, in most cases, plus voice, except for these two sounds. If you recall, the second thing we discussed was the place of articulation. You can imagine that this is the back of the mouth and this is the front of the mouth. Moving from back to front, exactly like we did, you move through all of the places of articulation. So these are the glottal sounds, the velar sounds, palatal, alveopalatal, alveolar, interdental, labiodental, and the most front place of articulation, the bilabial sounds. We also talked about the manner in which these sounds are articulated, and you can see these on this side of the graph. And so here you have the stops, the fricatives, affricates, nasals, lateral approximates, retroflex approximates, and the glide. So the reason why we talked about these things in the first place was because we wanted a method to describe each sound individually. We talked about whether the sound was voiced or voiceless. We also talked about the place of articulation for each sound and the manner of articulation. So let's put that into practice real quick. The convention used for describing any sound is to first describe its voicing status, and then its place status, and then its manner status. For example, if you were to describe this sound, P, you would say the P is, first you want to talk about its voicing. Since it's to the left, it's a minus voice, so you would say voiceless, comma. Now describe the place of articulation. It's bilabial, so I say bilabial. Then you want to describe its manner of articulation. It's a stop, so I say the P sound is a voiceless, bilabial stop. So please try to remember the correct order for describing consonant. We start with the voice, and then the place, and then the manner of articulation. Let's do some quick practice. How would you describe the sound B? Going back to this chart, B is on the right side, so it's voiced, bilabial, stop. Voiced, bilabial, stop. How about the M sound? Going back to the chart, the M is on the right side, that means it's voiced, and you should know that all nasals are voiced. It's also a bilabial, and it's a nasal. So I'd say it's a voiced, bilabial, nasal. The N would be a voiced, alveolar nasal. Okay, so let's try that. It's a voiced, alveolar, nasal. And now we can do pretty much the same for every other sound. How about this sound? Well, since it's to the right, it's a voiced, alveopalatal, affricate. This R is a voiced, alveolar, retroflex approximate. I suggest you practice describing the rest of the consonants just to get the hang of things. So we started off now by discussing the consonants. In our next lecture we're going to discuss the vowels, okay? So stay tuned for the next lecture.